what I'm going to try to do is look at how institutions, and through one specific institution, which is quality of government, actually affects the returns of policies that are aimed in the European Union to reduce regional disparities and to actually promote economic growth and economic development in the periphery of Europe. The European Union is a very, very strange animal. When you take a look at the budget and you see what they are doing, it turns out that 80%, 85% of the funds are devoted to two things. The first one is agriculture, and mainly to support certain agricultural produce. And the second one, which is now the largest, is to promote economic development by reducing disparities between the core and the periphery, focusing specifically on regions. When you put that together directly for regions, we have about a third of the budget. If you put all other, so rural developments, etc., you get to 40%. So it's actually the largest entry in the budget. And how do we do that? How is it done in the European Union? Well, it's relatively simple. What we do, we follow traditional growth theory. And in growth theory, whether you look at neoclassical growth theory or you look at endogenous growth theory, economic growth is fueled by three key factors. Capital, proxied by infrastructure, labor, so level of education, more of the people that you have, and technology, which is the capacity of territories to innovate. Nothing about institutions. I don't know why you call this symposium or the main title about institutions. It doesn't count. It's part of the residual factor, at least in those theories. And if you're a neoclassical economist, it's even simpler, because then you have labor and technology that are exogenous, so they are easily available everywhere. And the only key factor is one, which is capital, which is proxy to infrastructure. So the answer is simple. The policy recipe is very simple. You build infrastructure everywhere, especially in those peripheral regions, and you're going to grow, you're going to converge. And that is what the European Union has been doing for now the best of 2 decades and a half, especially since the reform of the structural funds in 1989. 1 in 2 euros that have been invested in development in Europe, mainly to try to achieve economic growth, has been devoted to all types of infrastructure, and in particular physical transport infrastructure. And why? Because according to this theory, physical infrastructure is actually believed that it's going to make the biggest difference. Putting money into motorways, putting money into airports, putting money into high-speed trains is the best thing since sliced bread. Forget about all the rest. You put the money there and the periphery is going to grow. You're going to have lower disparities, and as a result, everyone is going to be better off. And so intense has been the investment that the former laggards, the places of Europe that actually had a biggest deficit in terms of infrastructure, have become the leaders, but not any type of leaders, massive leaders. I'll give you an example. Today, I am Spanish, so I'm going to criticize my country quite a lot, but Portugal and Spain have got the best endowment in infrastructure terms in the world. And I'm not exaggerating. This is just one indicator, kilometers of motorways. And you take a look, this is the situation in 2009, which is the point of my analysis. And in terms of motorways and the network of motorways, it's not Germany that leads, it's not France, and I'm just comparing it to the 15 original member states of the European Union. It would be unfair to put Poland or to put Bulgaria, Romania, that have only been receiving funds in some cases for 10 years, in other cases for less than 7 years. Spain has got the biggest network of motorways. And you can say Spain is a big country. Yes. But Spain is 20% smaller than France and has 2/3 of the population of France. And when you do it in relative terms, when you go kilometers of motorways per GDP, Portugal comes first, but it's not 20% more than the average of Europe. It's not 30% more than the average of Europe. is actually, you take a look at the average, is 5.6, Portugal is 15.6, is 300%, the average. In Portugal, at a certain point when you are going between Lisbon and Porto, you have 3 motorways in parallel. Now, because of the crisis, there are toll motorways, and no one takes them, so they take the old national road that is massively congested. But the motorways are absolutely fantastic. In fact, I'm completely dismayed when I come to Germany. Yesterday I came from Madrid. I took the taxi in one of the large ring roads to get to the airport, no time, everything working perfectly. What did I get to Germany? A country that when I came in the 1980s here for the first time, I was in Norway. The trains worked, everything was on time. Now what do I see? Congested motorways with constant works, congested airports. Well, I didn't have to experience what poor Jörg had to experience in the last 2 days, but nevertheless, it's like that. Trains that don't go on time, they're always congested. So clearly, there has been a shift in roles. The main problem has been that this shift, this massive pumping of money into what was supposed to be the key factor for generating economic growth in Europe, has not delivered the expected growth. In fact, yes, Spain converged, and it's converged significantly, but since the crisis is actually going backwards and going backwards relatively quickly. Portugal, that has been receiving more money than Spain and spending similarly in motorways, not high-speed trains, but big stadia, for example, has not converged, and has converged very little, especially since the year 2001 crisis. And the question is, yeah, and just put in the comparison here. Sorry, I think I had Germany, but Germany's gone now. So Germany, you can take there. It's not in any case the leader. It has not converged. So the expectations of theory that by pumping resources into physical infrastructure and the supply of physical infrastructure, that there was going to be faster growth in those areas that receive the money has not been fulfilled. And here there are 2 potential explanations. One is the new economic geography sort of explanation. The idea that you're putting money into networks, and in this case transportation networks, and you're connecting more developed parts of a country or more developed parts of Europe to less developed parts of Europe, might not benefiting the periphery. Is the 2-way road theory that has been developed for time, but popularized by Diego Puga. The idea that if you connect, let's say, Madrid, which is the biggest pole in Spain, with any other part of the country, which is what has been done in Spain, you end up reinforcing concentration of economic activity in Madrid at the expense of the periphery. And that might be a plausible explanation that may work, although I'm not completely convinced 100%. So it needs more empirical evidence in that respect. But one of the other factors that I think is important and has been completely overlooked has been how, on the one hand, the quality of local institutions has mediated decisions about whether to build or not to build infrastructure, and more importantly, what type of infrastructure to build. Leading to, when you have poor institutional quality at the local level, to a lot of sumptuous but relatively useless infrastructure building, and in areas with better quality of institutions, to perhaps more efficient and ultimately more effective types of infrastructure. Why is that? Well, there are 2 potential reasons. When you look at what's happening in many parts of the European periphery, which are characterized by generally, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that later, by poor quality of local institutions, what you're going to have is you're going to have much more political and economic meddling. On the one hand, you're going to see that weak institutions are not going to facilitate the use of policies for the collective good, but for the good of certain individuals or certain groups and certain powerful groups. In this case, decision makers. That would use investment in infrastructure not with a medium or long-term view to promote economic development, but with a short-term view of let's try to win the next elections. And of course, infrastructure is, on the one hand, popular. People want infrastructure, unless you're a NIMBYist or you're a banana, build absolutely nothing near anywhere. Decision makers find infrastructure much more rewarding than, let's say, investment in human capital. Because if you invest in human capital, the people you're investing in, they look exactly the same after the investment as before the investment. They probably look a bit older. And that is a problem. You can put that in a newspaper. Look at, I'm going to put myself on that. Andrés, we gave him a grant. He went abroad, he came back, and he looks a bit more worn out because he's been partying too much. So that cannot be sold. And they are not certainly not going to put a ribbon around my forehead and cut it. That would be really probably a safety hazard. What they do is, we are here, we're for 4 years, there's no airport, so we want an airport. And in 4 years you have an airport, and you have it right before the elections. And you can vote for that. On top of that, you have what is now very popular, these revolving doors. You have, at the same time, you're generating vested economic interests. I'm going to put an example. 1989, when the reform of structural funds took place, Spain had 5 of the top 50 construction companies in the world, which was more or less commensurate to the size of its economy. And they were not at the top. They were towards the bottom. It did reflect also an economy that was a bit geared towards construction, but nothing out of the ordinary. In 2009, at the beginning of the crisis, Spain had 5 of the 15 top companies in construction in the world. It had 4 of the top 10. And some of them were absolutely massive. So they could actually decide and influence decision making by not just local, regional, national politicians, and often the people that were in the boards of these companies had been politicians deciding on where to build and what to build and what not to build. So it did lead to a massive system of vested interest that facilitated a self-perpetuating idea that infrastructure was going to do good, that was supported by the population, and to those massive levels of investment that had not seen any precedent. So you start when you need it, but then you just go over and it becomes a bit like a drug. But of course, there's also an issue about corruption and collusion. It's easier to get bribes when you do big things. And it's easier as a result by building infrastructure than by doing human capital or innovation. You might get a small bribe by a small firm, and that might not end up in the hands of the top politicians. If you do small infrastructure, you're going to get even bigger bribes, but it's not going to be enough. If you do a big infrastructure, the potential for getting personal bribes or bribes for your political party, etc., increases in the absence of a strong civil society, in the absence of strong institutions. And therefore, what we have is that this bribery can induce the selection of suboptimal projects. It can lead to distorts of tender, to lobbying, to this vested interest actually going beyond just being vested interest and becoming a corrupt system. And the result is massive suboptimal investment in infrastructure, which we probably have seen in most of the periphery of Europe over the last few years, but that has been understudied until now. So the relationship between institutions, infrastructure policies, and economic growth has been not studied at all, with the exception of Esfahani and Ramirez, and they have done it only at the national level. Just going to give you some examples. I'm not going to start by Spain, I'm going to start by Portugal. After all, they are our neighbors, and they are the country with the biggest endowment of motorways by GDP in the world. And the example I put is this nice bridge, which is the Vasco da Gama bridge, 18 kilometers of bridge, the longest bridge in Europe. And you say, where's the big strait that you have to go? Well, Lisbon has got a river, but it's a river. And it has got another bridge, the traditional bridge, which is the 25th of April bridge, 2.5 kilometers of bridge. So Portugal, and this bridge is congested. You have the agglomeration of Lisbon. This is Lisbon. And if you put Lisbon with the agglomeration, being a bit generous, it goes up to 2 million people. City, and it expands towards the sea, which is somewhere around here, towards Estoril and Cascais. For those of you that know Lisbon, fantastic place to go. By the way, it's in this direction, and also to the south towards Setúbal, which is more or less about here. So they set up a commission. We got one bridge, which was built in the 1960s, which, by the way, looks like the Golden Gate. It's a very nice bridge. The 25th of April bridge that connects this part, the city of Lisbon, to Almada, and then into the rest. And this is really congested. So there's a need for a second bridge. So they established a commission. The commission has 3 proposals. The first one, do a bridge in parallel a bit to the west. So you do exactly the same bridge, perhaps in a different form, 2.5 kilometers, and that would address many of the problems. Second bridge is from the center of Lisbon to Barreiro. So you shorten it significantly. It's 8 kilometers of bridge, a big bridge, over this beginning of the estuary, which is the Mar da Baja, and then you shorten the trip to Setúbal. Or if the problem is, which was not, that you have a lot of freight transportation from the north of Portugal to the south of Portugal, then you just build a motorway coming this way, and Portugal's built motorways everywhere, was building motorways, and you put a bridge over here, which is 800 meters of a bridge. The problem is you don't want the same bridge that you already have. This one, which makes sense, has a problem that it's difficult because you have to go through and dig through the center of historical center of Lisbon, so that creates a problem. The third one is 800 meters of a bridge that actually doesn't. Who wants that? And the question is, we want a bridge that we can be remembered by. We are Portuguese and we want to be the best in the world for something. And we want to have the longest bridge. This Scandinavians are building a connection that is a tunnel and a bridge over and under the Öresund. We have to be bigger than them, despite the fact that the Öresund is straight and there are big populations on both sides. So let's build it here, over here, connecting the site of the Expo, and this is important, you have to do it at the same time as the Expo 1999, to this place in Montijo, which is actually in the middle of nowhere. But it's 18 kilometers of a bridge, and it makes it the longest in Europe. And the bridge is absolutely fantastic. It's great. It's very nice. Although I lived in London at the time, I took my car, or my parents' car, and went to cross the bridge when it was open. And it looks good. It does look good. But the problem is that it seems that a lot of people did what I did, Portuguese and Spanish. And since then, traffic has gone down year on year on year. But that doesn't faze the Portuguese and the people who took the decision, because it's the longest bridge in Europe. And on top of that, the minister that decided to overrule the recommendations of the committee became, after he stepped down, the director of the company actually managing the bridge. So it's, again, the revolving doors. But I think I probably blame too much my neighbors. I'm just, after all, I'm Spanish. I'm just going to put some examples in Spain. And this is all over the place. High-speed trains. Spain is the country, and they're very proud. The second country in the world with the highest network of high-speed rail. Forget about France. The French are amateurs. Our trains are better, they're faster, let's see, and they run even more on time than the French. We have the biggest network. The problem is that, yes, you have a lot of stations, not just one. I'm just putting the Expo station in Seville that has seen one high-speed train in its life. And that was in 1992 for the Expo in 1992 in Seville, when the King and Queen of Spain took the train to go there and arrive to open the Expo. Since then, I've been many times to Seville and to Cartuja, where the station is, which is the high-tech park in Seville, which, by the way, is not a high-tech park in any way. And I decided to take one day. I was too early, so I said, I'm going to take the train and see how the station is. It was late September, quite hot, and that's quite normal in Seville. I had to wait for an hour for one train. Two people got on the train. One person got up, and one train per hour was already weird. Got out at the so-called Olympic Stadium, a big 60,000-seater stadium in a city that has already two 50,000-seater football stadia. And I was the only one getting to the expo station, and I had to actually lift the shutters to come out because they were down because it was so damn hot. Other cases, Radial Motorways in Madrid. I come, take the taxi from the airport here to Heidelberg. It's congested, works. I don't care. In Madrid, when I go there, when I'm there, I have one ring road, one ring road here, two ring roads, a third ring road that's about to be finished, two half ring roads. On top, I got 3 motorways going in all directions, and those motorways have been doubled by toll motorways. The only problem is that because of the crisis, there's not enough traffic apart from peak hours on Fridays and perhaps Monday mornings to congest the main motorways because there's so many. And the toll roads are taken by no one. So they are completely bankrupt. So they have been taken over by the state that's subsidizing them. So they first subsidized the building of the motorways, and now they're subsidizing the maintenance of not just the roads, but also the companies that are completely bankrupt. And then I go to my favorites. Spain has got 56 airports. 56. My colleagues in the Netherlands saying, well, we got a population that's 1/3 of Spain. We got 1 airport. Well, not true. You have 3. But 1 real one. Spain has got 56. It's a bigger country. 5 airports have not seen a plane. Well, one saw Villarreal team, so from Castellón, this one, take off to play some European game. But that's the only one. There are 5 or 6 airports that have got average, and I'm not joking, the Lleida airport, these are colleagues in Barcelona that are looking at it, has got an average per week of about 18. 18, 1-8, not 80. And you have this airport, the Castellón airport, that actually has seen just 1 plane over time. But there's, let me just start with, there was the Ciudad Real airport. Then this is very recent. This is July 17, 2015. It's the Financial Times. That it cost €1 billion to build in the middle of nowhere. So a city of about 110,000, 180 kilometers, well, 170 kilometers south of Madrid. That was sold to a Chinese investor for €10,000. I didn't realize that it was being sold. Otherwise, I would have bid for it and taken it because it was a really good price for something that costs $1 billion. And of course, the high-speed rail, which is now in this year, which is an electoral year, Spain is opening more than 1,000 new kilometers of high speed, despite the fact that it doesn't have any money for maintaining the roads, let alone the rail network. And what we have is that the high-speed TGV, the high-speed rail between Toledo, 80,000 inhabitants, 70 kilometers south of Madrid, to Cuenca, being generous, 40,000 inhabitants, to Albacete, which is about 130,000 in between Madrid and Murcia, was closed the year it was open, less than a year, because it costs, just in terms of maintenance per day, €18,000, and the 2 trains that were going in each direction had an average of 9 passengers. Of course, the day that was closed, I switched on the internet Spanish television, and it was a big fuss saying, we just opened this new infrastructure, we're closing it, and they went to interview the people on the train. And of course, the 3, 4, 5 people that were there saying, this is outrageous. It's a public service, and we have paid for it, etc. But I was thinking, dear sir, it's cheaper for the Spanish taxpayer and the European taxpayer, for that sake, to actually charter a helicopter between Toledo and Albacete every day for you for the rest of your life, rather than to keep that sort of maintenance cost. So what I'm going to try to say is that why are so many decisions about sumptuous, but ultimately, I'm not going to say useless, but of little use, infrastructures of little use, have been made in many parts of Southern and perhaps now increasingly in Eastern Europe. I've been sent by the European Commission year after year to Poland to try to convince people in Białystok, so the marshal of the Podlaskie region, or the mayor of Białystok, not to build an airport there. Or to Lublin, I did the same thing last year. Why? Because they want to do exactly the same thing. They got money, they want to spend it, and they want to get something visible that brings them electoral returns. Why is that? And the answer is going to be perhaps because the institutions are well below par and are leading to this sort of situation whereby you make wrong decisions that then have very little impact. And I'm going to try to demonstrate it by concentrating on two types of roads. The more sumptuous, they're necessary sometimes, but more sumptuous and popular motorways in comparison to the more humble, but perhaps as effective, if not more effective, secondary road. I'm going to look at change in road infrastructure, and I'm going to do it over the period, I'll go into the data in a moment, 1996 until 2009 at the beginning of the crisis. Crux is the measurement. And how do we measure quality of government? What is a good quality of government? What are good institutions and throughout quality of government? And of course, this is where the difficulty starts. Which government corrupt, etc. And there are objective measures, there's subjective measures. Here, the good thing is I'm not doing it. So if you have any criticisms, you go to the guys in Gothenburg at the Gothenburg Quality of Government Institute that actually in 2009, at the request of the European Commission, did a survey of 32,000 European individuals asking 32 questions, 33,000 asking 32 questions, and created a composite quality of government index that also has 4 key components, which are corruption, rule of law, government effectiveness, and voice and accountability and transparency. And they repeated that sort of analysis in 2013 when they did, instead of 33,000, they did 80-something something surveys. And the results were remarkably similar. What came out is here. This is the composite index for 2013. You'll say it's 2013. I used the 2009 in the analysis, and that 2009 has been made a panel by combining it at the national level with the World Bank Global Governance Index. Use exactly the same criteria. And what comes out is first a bit surprising. You would imagine that there's a north-south division or core peripheral division of quality of government in Europe, and that's not exactly the case. Of course, there's a core. If you're a Scandinavian, Danish, Scandinavian, Nordic, Danish, Finnish, or Swedish, generally have good quality of government. I've been involved in research in Norway for quite a long time, and in my naivety, when we were looking at attitudes of entrepreneurs, we would ask questions about trust. Do you trust the police? Do you trust government? Do you trust the local administration? Do you trust the judicial system? Do you trust other entrepreneurs? And being Spanish, I was expecting perhaps it's going to be better than in Spain, where 20% trust the judicial system. No, the answer was always 95, 99, 98% saying, yes, we do trust, and everything works. So in that respect, you have a system that works. But it's not just that. You have in places like Flanders, in places like northern Italy, most of Austria, southern Germany, Baden-Württemberg, here where we are, that score relatively highly. Other parts of the core, Wallonia, clearly the worst, is the only government that actually complained, and complained very hard, saying this is wrong. How can you dare say that we got bad quality of government? The answer was simple. We're not saying it. It's your people that are saying that, so you better talk to your people. But then there's not straight periphery. Spain and Portugal are, in many parts, are not particularly worse off than France and, for example, the UK. And most of Spain and Portugal are better off than Italy, Romania, Greece, etc. And there's a big gap between northern Italy and southern Italy. And parts of the Central and Eastern Europe have got poor quality of government, but much better than. And when people ask me, what is the difference? Why is quality of government in Spain and Portugal so much better than, for example, in Campania or in, let's say, Sofia, or in parts of Romania or in parts of Greece? Well, in Spain you say, or Portugal, we're going to build an airport, and 4 years later you have an airport. This been in Spain, full of marble, full of statues, nice counters. It doesn't matter that the airport doesn't make economic sense, that no planes are there, but you have an airport. In Campania or Calabria, or for that sake in parts of Greece, you say, we're going to build an airport, and 4 years later you have no airport and no money. So that's clearly the difference of what's happening here, and that's reflected in the perceptions of citizens. Then what we do is we also look at the performance in the countries in which we put in the analysis, the regions, the 166 regions that we consider. And there are two measures here. How dynamic has your has your region been over the period of analysis? And here we have this sign, which is this is our American signs. We should have put European signs, which probably nicer, but I couldn't find others. And this is the investment in motorways. And you can see that in principle, the biggest investment in motorways has taken place in Portugal and in Spain, but also in places like Hungary. There has been much less in Poland or Romania, for that sake. Some parts of central France and some parts of Sweden have witnessed also significant investments. But if you take a look at the correlation, I have the graph, but I don't want to put it here. Don't have time either. I don't have any time. That's then the situation would be that there's no correlation. And when you secondary roads, the panorama is different. France, the Netherlands, and Hungary that invested have invested in secondary roads. Spain, much less, and the Portuguese say, we don't care about secondary roads. Why do you want a secondary road when you can have a new motorway? So the question is, has this matter? Has it made a difference? And we're trying to do that by analyzing change in GDP growth as a factor of three key factors. How much have you invested in infrastructure, dividing between motorways and secondary roads? How much have you invested in quality? What is your quality of government, sorry, your levels of quality of government, and the interaction between both to see if quality of government actually affects the returns of infrastructure or mediates the returns of infrastructure. We do that very quickly for the period 1986 to 2009 in 166 countries, regions in the European Union, and we divide the analysis between the whole sample, and then we do look at the core and the periphery, identifying the periphery as the regions that receive the highest amount of money from the European Union, and two different types of infrastructure that I mentioned before. What are the results? Well, first, our analysis seems to be in the right direction. We control, this is for the whole sample. When we put the controls, we control for innovation, we control for human capital, people employed with tertiary education, and they have the sign that we expect. More innovative regions, better human capital leads to greater economic growth. More agricultural employment leads to lower economic growth, and there are positive spillovers motorways in Europe. And when you take a look at our variables of interest, investment in motorways, apart from when you don't put any controls, then there's nothing. We are just putting motorways all over Europe, and in return in terms of economic development, which is the ultimate growth. However, quality of government is always positive and highly significant at the 1% level, with the exception of when you take a look at government accountability, which is one of the dimensions. And the interaction is never significant. That's for the full sample. When we take a look at motorways in peripheral regions, which is our variable of interest, the results are exactly the same. Just very quickly, nothing is significant. Here, quality of government is always significant and positive, and the interaction is not. All the controls remain more or less the same. What about other roads, secondary roads? What we get here is the same pattern for the two principal components, the change or investment in other roads. And when we look at quality of government, it's all positive and significant with the exception of government accountability. But there's a key difference, is that the interaction term for other roads becomes positive and significant. Meaning that the better the quality of government, the higher the returns and the higher the influence of investing in secondary roads, which doesn't happen in terms of motorways. And when you take a look, the higher the quality of government, and you do the correlation, the higher the level of investment in secondary roads relative to motorways. When we look at peripheral regions, very quickly, the story is more or less the same. Controls don't change that much. Investment in motorways, sorry, in secondary roads in the periphery is non-significant, with one exception, but is marginally, well, two exceptions, but are marginally significant. Quality of government is always significant, highly significant and positive, and the interaction is actually much more significant than for the full sample. In fact, those regions that have got in the periphery the best quality of government are those that are investing relatively more. It's not that they're not investing in motorways, but relatively more in secondary roads, and those that are getting the biggest returns from any investment in infrastructure. So what can we conclude? And that's, I'm happy that I went quickly in the second half. What can we conclude from this? First, that what is the residual factor in most analysis, which are institutions, you're probably right to call your symposiums institutions and knowledge. Because we know now in Europe what drives economic growth at regional level, both in the core and in the periphery, are three factors. And possibly in this order: human capital, institutions, and capacity to innovate. However, we have not been investing enough in that one, in those three. We have been just sending or spreading money mainly to put infrastructure everywhere, but the returns of infrastructure have been very limited. And have we put more money into human capital, where we get less than 20% of the structural funds? Or have we paid more attention to institutions that until 2014, last year's reform of the structural funds, did not feature in the policy at all? Probably would we be much better off individually in those peripheral regions of the European Union, but also collectively as a return for the whole of Europe. But also, the second factor is that investment in or improvements in quality of government actually make a big difference for the effectiveness of all of the policies, because it first leads to making better decisions about development strategies and where to invest and where not to invest, and what types of strategies, what sorts of roads are more necessary than, let's say, high-speed roads. They also, better quality of government, reduce the risks of this sort of collusion, increased corruption that is being generated in itself by the mechanisms of the policy, that is creating negative incentives in order to generate policies that might not be the most adequate policies for economic development in the periphery of Europe, and as a result in the whole of Europe. Hence, we have to put back institutions into the whole process, because the benefits are double. And they too appear to be a precondition to make sure that any sort of policy that we put in place in order to achieve greater economic development is going to yield better returns. It's also going to lead to greater economic performance and greater development in the periphery, but also in Europe as a whole. Thank you very much.